The ancient forest near Vinnytsia breathes with a heavy, watchful silence. This is a place where history did not simply happen. It was buried. The towering pines stand as silent sentinels over a scarred landscape, overgrown anti-tank ditches, the monstrous, broken teeth of reinforced concrete, the faint, sinister geometry of roads leading to nowhere. The air itself feels thick, resistant to sound, as if absorbing echoes from the past. A small archaeological team works with a tense, focused energy, their usual academic chatter subdued. They are far from the main ruins of the Werwolf complex, probing the outer periphery, the forgotten kill zone. Among them is Anna, a historian in her 30s, whose academic curiosity has always been tempered by a deep, personal solemnity when working here. Her grandfather fought in these woods. For her, every shovel of earth is an act of remembrance or exhumation. Today, the ground feels different. Her trowel strikes not the usual rubble, but something pliant and fibrous, rotted wool. She switches to a brush, her movements slowing, her breath coming shallower. What emerges is not a single bone, but a chaotic tableau of death, a jumble of vertebrae, a pelvis shattered by tremendous force. And then, the skull. Anna freezes. The skull is turned upward, as if its owner had been looking at the sky in their final moment. And there, just above the left eye socket, is a perfect, small, circular hole. A hole with distinct, inward splintered edges. Not from shrapnel, from a bullet. A close-range, execution-style shot. Her hands begin to tremble inside her gloves. This is not a fallen soldier from a distant artillery barrage. This is intimate, violent murder. The team gathers, the mood shifting from routine to electrified unease. They expand the excavation with surgical care. The story in the earth becomes horrifyingly clear. These are not the remains of a German soldier. The remnants of clothing are Soviet, the thick padded telegrika, trousers of a specific cut issued to reconnaissance and airborne units. The boots have thick, rubber-soled treads designed for silence. And then, the artifacts that make no sense. A crushed, sophisticated brass altimeter of a type used by paratroopers. A carefully crafted multi-tool knife of British make. And most damning of all, bundled in the remains of an oilskin pouch, 3 blocks of a pale, cheese-like substance, plastic explosive, next to a corroded but intact British time pencil delay fuse. This was no lost infantryman. This was a highly trained saboteur, equipped with the best tools of the trade, buried in a shallow, unmarked grave within the inner security cordon of Hitler's most secret headquarters. The cold, logical conclusion hits Anna like a physical blow. Someone infiltrated this fortress, and someone here killed them and hid the evidence. Weeks later, in the sterile, humming silence of the National Archives, Anna's mentor, Volodymyr, stares at a high-resolution scan on his monitor. He has spent decades navigating the labyrinth of Soviet-era classifications, his cynicism a well-honed tool. The file on his screen is titled Operational File Myth. He expects the usual dismissive reports, denials of unconfirmed partisan activity. The first pages are just that. But then, a microfilmed image appears, blurry and tilted, as if photographed in haste. It is a hand-drawn map. The paper is coarse, the lines are precise. It details the western perimeter of the Werwolf. And there, marked not with a cross but with a small, sharp arrow, is a point near a guard post and a drainage culvert. A path is inked in red, snaking through the wire and minefields, penetrating deep into the heart of the complex. At the terminus, a single, typewritten coordinate. Volodymyr cross-references it with modern satellite imagery. The coordinate sits less than 300 meters from the main hrer bunker. His blood runs cold. This is not a speculative report. This is an assault plan. He scrolls further, his heart pounding in his ears. The final document is not a closure report, but a single sheet of faded onion skin paper. It is a typed list, a roster. At the top, the heading, Special Designation Group Hunters. Below it, 5 aliases. And next to each alias, a handwritten note in stark, bureaucratic red ink. The notes are brief. Missing. Presumed dead. No contact after penetration. Signal lost. But next to the last name on the list, the red ink has been used with such force it tore the paper. The note here is different. It does not say, presumed dead. It says, in all capital letters, terminated on site. Liquidate all traces. Case closed. Volodymyr slowly removes his glasses. The quiet hum of the archive servers now sounds like a roar. He looks from the monitor to the photograph on his desk. Anna's team standing around the open excavation. He sees the dark stain of the burial pit in the earth. The ghost is no longer just a skeleton. It has a designation. It was part of a team called Hunters, and its own side gave the order to erase it from history. The forest did not just hide a body. It hid a secret mission, a betrayal, and a direct material link to an attempt to kill Adolf Hitler in his own lair. The silence of 8 decades has just been shattered by a scream from the grave. The hunt for the truth has now truly begun. The silence of the modern forest is violently ripped away, replaced by a cacophony of terror and industry. It is the summer of 1942, and the woods near Vinnytsia are no longer a place of nature, but a gaping wound. The air is thick with the acidic smell of sweat, fresh concrete, and despair. From a bird's-eye view, the scale of the operation is monstrous. A vast swath of ancient woodland has been clear-cut, exposing the raw Ukrainian earth like a suppurating sore. In this clearing, a geometric nightmare takes shape. The foundation pits for massive bunkers, like giant graves being dug in reverse. Ant-like columns of men move in brutal, unending procession. These are not German engineers. They are Soviet prisoners of war, their uniforms in tatters, their faces hollowed by starvation and a horror that has become routine. Their eyes are dead, fixed on the ground before their feet, a survival mechanism against witnessing the whole. Guarding them are not just Wehrmacht soldiers, but squads of SS Totenkopfverb, NDE, the Death's Head units. Their presence is a constant, low-temperature threat. They do not merely patrol, they inhabit the space with a casual, terrifying ownership. A prisoner stumbles under the weight of a steel beam. There is no shout, no warning. A single, precise rifle shot cracks across the clearing. The man collapses. The column barely breaks step, the men around him flinching internally but mechanically moving forward, understanding the new, unspoken rule. The fallen are not to be helped. They are part of the foundation now. This is the birth of Werwolf. The name is not just a code, it is a statement of predatory arrogance. The location was chosen with cold, strategic genius, deep in the rear, protected by vast distances, yet close enough to the ferocious Eastern Front for Hitler to feel its pulse. He wanted a Spartan forward command post, a symbol of his closeness to the Lebensraum he was carving out. What was being built, however, was a fortress of profound paranoia. The local Ukrainian villagers in the surrounding hamlets are prisoners in their own homes. Their world has been severed overnight. Curfews are absolute. The distant, rhythmic pounding of pile drivers and the shriek of power saws are the soundtrack of their new existence. Strange, unmarked trucks rumble down their dirt roads at all hours, their cargo hidden under tarpaulins. Young women disappear into the forest, recruited for kitchen or laundry work, and return silent, their eyes wide with unspoken traumas. Old men tending their stunted vegetable patches at the forest's edge see things. The intricate patterns of barbed wire being laid in multiple layers, the sudden professional efficiency of men in field gray, who are clearly not ordinary soldiers, but the cold-eyed technicians of the hrer's personal security, the Reichssicherheitsdienst. The most powerful testimony comes not from a document but from a child's memory. In a cramped, earthen-floored hut, a young boy named Yuri presses his face against the cold window pane at dusk. He watches the distant glow of floodlights staining the underbelly of the clouds above the forest, a sickly orange. He hears, carried on the wind, not just the sounds of construction, but once, a sudden, short burst of automatic fire, followed by an echoing silence more frightening than the noise. His grandfather, a veteran of another war, pulls him away from the window, his gnarled hand trembling. He doesn't speak of Germans or Russians. He whispers, in the ancient language of the land, about a Vovk, a wolf that has made its den in the heart of the woods, a beast that demands sacrifice. This is no longer just a military headquarters. In the psyche of the occupied, it becomes a living, breathing entity, a place of dark power that consumes men and secrets alike. The intelligence that trickles out is fragmented, carried on the breath of the terrified. A partisan courier, moving like a shadow through the night, collects these whispers. A discarded ration tin of a type not seen before, the specific insignia on a collar, the depth of a foundation trench, suggesting not a barrack, but something meant to withstand the wrath of gods. These whispers are stitched together into a crude, terrifying tapestry. The report that finally reaches Moscow is not a dry, strategic assessment. It is a stark, unequivocal declaration, burned into a coded message. The highest level of enemy command is establishing a permanent lair. The wolf is here. In Berlin and in Rostenburg, the existence of Werwolf is the Reich's most closely guarded secret. But here in the stolen land, there is no secret. There is only the overwhelming daily evidence of its reality. The forest itself is being transformed into a weapon, a fortified, isolated, and brutally efficient machine designed for one purpose: to protect the single most important man in the Nazi world. The lair is not just being built. It is being consecrated with blood, fear, and concrete. And in doing so, it unwittingly paints the brightest possible target on itself. The beast has shown its hiding place, and now, from the depths of the Moscow winter, hunters begin to plot their approach. Moscow, in deep winter, is a city turned inward, a fortress of ice and resolve. The war is a deafening roar, 1,000 kilometers to the west, but here, in the labyrinthine bowels of the NKVD headquarters on Lubyanka Square, the conflict is conducted in a chilling, absolute silence. The air smells of stale tobacco, cheap floor polish, and the faint, metallic scent of fear that has seeped into the very walls. In a room without windows, a room that feels more like a vault, 3 men stand around a heavy oak table. They are not soldiers in the traditional sense. They are surgeons of the clandestine war. The only light falls from a single green-shaded lamp, illuminating a mosaic of intelligence that has coalesced into a single, audacious possibility. At the center lies the partisan report from Vinnytsia, now overlaid with aerial reconnaissance photographs, smuggled sketches from forced laborers, and intercepted German logistical orders. The grainy photos show not just buildings, but patterns. The concentric rings of fencing, the placement of anti-aircraft batteries, the distinct, isolated compound believed to house the hrer bunker. It is no longer a rumor. It is a blueprint. The eldest of the three, Colonel Gregor Vason of the GRU, is a man whose face is a road map of old betrayals and colder victories. His fingers, stained yellow from decades of smoking, trace the imagined path from the forest's edge to the heart of the complex. He speaks not of glory, but of geometry, of pressure points, of the predictable rhythms of security, even in a place designed to defy prediction. He calculates the staggering political and psychological yield of a successful strike against the impossible calculus of its cost. In his mind, the werewolf is not just a target. It is the ultimate test of his life's dark craft. Opposite him, Major Pyotr Volkov of the NKVD's Special Tasks Directorate represents the state's ruthless will. Younger, with the calm eyes of a true believer, he sees the operation not as a military gamble, but as a revolutionary act of retribution. He argues with a quiet, terrifying intensity. The assassination of Hitler would not merely decapitate the Nazi beast. It would shatter its myth of invincibility, trigger chaos in the German High Command, and become the most potent propaganda weapon of the war. For him, the human cost is irrelevant against the scale of such a victory. He is the one who invokes the name of Stalin, not as a man, but as an embodiment of the necessary, unforgiving will that must now be applied. The third man is silent for a long time. He is the professor, a gaunt, middle-aged specialist whose real name is lost even to most files. He is a savant of silence and death, recruited from the ranks of pre-war mountaineers and explorers. He lays out the physical tools on the table with the care of a priest preparing relics. They are a chilling collection of foreign marvels and local ingenuity, British plastic explosives, so stable they can be molded like clay, American silent-release toggle bolts for scaling walls, German wire cutters captured at Stalingrad, superior to their own, and his own creations, non-metallic knives of hardened resin, climbing ropes woven from dyed hemp to blend with forest foliage, compact, poison-tipped needles disguised as seamstress tools. The debate is not about if, but how and who. A bombing raid is impossible. The site is too small, too fortified, too far. A partisan mass assault is suicide. They would be annihilated before reaching the outer fence. The only vector is a single, hyper-focused surgical strike. A small group, not an army, but a scalpel. And so the selection begins. This is not a call for volunteers. It is a harvest. From the files of the most elite Soviet units, the dismantled special-purpose motorized rifle brigades, the decimated paratrooper divisions, the shadowy school for saboteurs in Balashikha, names are extracted. The men chosen are not chosen for blind courage, but for a specific, pathological utility. We meet them not as a team, but as individual specimens under the microscope of the state. There is Ivan the Rock, a former mining engineer from the Urals, a man with a preternatural understanding of structures, stress points, and explosives. His file notes his absolute emotional inertia under fire during the defense of Sevastopol, where he calmly calculated charges to bring down a cliff face on advancing German infantry. There is Alexei the Ghost, a hunter and trapper from the Siberian taiga, whose senses seem more animal than human. He can move through a dry birch forest without making a sound. read a week-old trail as if it were a newspaper, and kill a sentry with a single thrown knife from 20 paces. His psychological evaluation chillingly states, does not perceive violence as an event, but as a process of nature. There is Mikhail the scholar, a linguist who spoke fluent German before the war, a man who can mimic the Swabian accent of a factory foreman or the clipped tones of a Prussian officer. His talent is not just language, but behavior, the 1,000 small gestures that make a man invisible in plain sight. His weakness, noted in the margin of his file, is a faint, lingering humanism, a dangerous tendency to see the enemy as people. There is Victor the Wire, a former radio operator and electrical engineer, a genius with anything that carries a current or a signal. He can build a transmitter from a handful of spare parts and sabotage a power grid with a piece of chewing gum and a fuse. He is a man of connections, of circuits, both electrical and social. He is the only one who jokes, a nervous, technical humor that masks a deep fear of open spaces. And finally, there is Dmitri the Wolf, their designated leader. A veteran of the brutal raids behind Finnish lines in the Winter War, he is a man of few words and absolute, chilling authority. He is a strategist of survival, a reader of men's breaking points. His file is the thickest, filled with acts of breathtaking audacity and cold-blooded efficiency. The last entry is a directive from a political officer, possesses necessary ideological fortitude, remains, however, an instrument, not a comrade. They are brought to a freezing, isolated dacha outside Moscow, a place that smells of pine sap and disinfectant. They do not train together as brothers in arms. They are subjected to a brutal, accelerated curriculum of annihilation. They study scale models of the Werwolf built from stolen architectural plans. They memorize guard rotation schedules gleaned from prisoner interrogations. They practice silent kills on dummies dressed in SS uniforms in a soundproofed basement. They are injected with stimulants to test their endurance and deprived of sleep to test their sanity. The professor watches them, a cold diagnostician. He does not see heroes. He sees a set of tools, each with a specific function, each with a flaw that must be managed. Colonel Vason sees a calculated risk, a terrifying equation where 5 lives are balanced against a chance to alter the war. Major Volkov sees the perfect, disposable weapon of the state, its will made flesh. The men themselves say little. They know they have been taken from the front lines, from prisoner camps, from certain death, for a reason that is both terrifying and exalted. They are not told the ultimate target. Not yet. But in the long, silent nights, as they clean their foreign-made weapons or study the eerie familiarity of the model bunker, they can feel the enormity of the shadow they are being asked to step into. They are no longer soldiers. They are being forged into something else, a phantom, a bullet with a human face, aimed at the very center of the Nazi night. Their mission is not to fight a war. It is to commit an act of world-altering violence. The order, when it comes, is not a rousing speech. It is a simple typewritten sentence placed before each of them. You will penetrate the enemy's deepest lair and eliminate the principal threat to the motherland. They all know the name that belongs to the title. The room grows very cold and very still. The architects have finished their designs. Now the instruments must be delivered to the point of execution. The night of the insertion is a void. A moonless, starless sky presses down on the barren Ukrainian steppe like a black coffin lid. The only sound is the desperate, rushing wind, carrying the scent of frost and turned earth. Inside the fuselage of a stripped-down, American-made Douglas A-20 Havoc, stolen from Lend-Lease shipments and painted a matte, light-absorbing black, the 5 men are not individuals, but a single, tense organism. The roar of the engines is a physical thing, vibrating through the metal floor into their bones. They do not look at each other. Each is locked in the private chamber of his own thoughts, his own fears, the memory of the model bunker now replaced by the imminent reality of the beast's true lair. Ivan the Rock methodically checks and rechecks the harness securing the explosives pack to his chest, his movements precise, mechanical, a ritual to ward off the chaos of the unknown. Alexei the Ghost has his eyes closed, but he is not sleeping. His head is tilted, as if listening to a frequency below the engine's scream, already tuning his senses to the forest below. Mikhail the Scholar silently mouths German vocabulary, military commands, casual greetings, the jargon of construction crews, his lips moving in a frantic, silent prayer. Victor the Wire clutches a small, non-magnetic compass, his knuckles white, his mind running through failure scenarios of their equipment. Dmitri the Wolf simply stares at the red jump light above the hatch, his face a mask of impassive stone, a conduit for the will that had forged them. The jump light flashes. A visceral electric jolt shoots through them all. The hatch yawns open, and the howling void outside is not just cold air. It is the mouth of the mission. They exit not as men, but as parcels of darkness ejected into the abyss. The silence after the plane's roar fades is absolute and shocking, broken only by the rustle of their specially designed low-noise canopies. They fall through the freezing black blind, trusting the calculations of men in a warm room 1,000 miles away. The ground, when it comes, is a brutal, knee-jarring impact in a plowed field miles from the target. The smell of damp soil and decayed stalks a sudden, grounding shock. They bury their chutes, their movements swift and silent, a well-rehearsed ballet of erasure. For 3 days and nights they are phantoms moving through a haunted land. They avoid roads, villages, even animal trails. They navigate by the stars, and by Alexei's preternatural instinct, slithering through drainage ditches, freezing for hours in muddy culverts, as German patrols rumble past close enough to smell the tobacco smoke on their uniforms. They witness the war from its underbelly, the smoldering ruins of a barn, the pathetic, looted remnants of a farmhouse, a crude grave marker by a roadside. The distance between the sterile models in the dacha and the grim, stinking reality of occupied Ukraine stretches into a chasm. Their first contact is not with the enemy, but with the war's ragged, desperate survivors. In a dense, wet thicket of alder trees, they are surrounded not by Germans, but by specters materializing from the undergrowth. The local partisan detachment, led by a man who introduces himself only as Kolod, the Cold, is a mirror held up to their own privileged, specialized existence. These men and women are gaunt, dressed in a horrifying patchwork of civilian rags and captured German uniforms, their eyes burning with a mixture of feral hunger and profound exhaustion. They smell of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and despair. The meeting is a collision of two worlds. Dmitri, with his crisp Moscow-issued maps and precise timetable, represents the distant, calculating hand of the center. Kolod, his face scarred by frostbite and betrayal, speaks of a war of daily attrition, of informers in every village, of arbitrary reprisals that wipe out families for a single cut telephone wire. He looks at the hunters with a mixture of awe and deep, ingrained suspicion. To him, they are the Moscow guests, cosmic beings dropped from another planet with a single spectacular mission, ignorant of the ground truth that will kill them. He warns them of things not on any map, of the Ukrainian police auxiliaries, the Hilfspolizei, who know every cowpath, of the new, hyper-vigilant SS battalion that arrived last week, of the German shepherds used on patrols, whose hearing is far more dangerous than any sentries. A palpable tension fractures the group. Victor, reliant on technology, wants to move fast, to exploit the element of surprise their high-altitude drop has granted them. Alexei, the natural creature of this environment, sides implicitly with Collard, advocating for a slower, more observant approach, learning the rhythm of the forest's new masters. Ivan remains stoic, a man of objectives, not politics. Mikhail, the linguist and empath, is visibly shaken by the raw, human suffering etched into the partisans' faces. His theoretical enemy begins to blur into a more complex, terrifying reality. Their first test comes not at the Werwolf fence, but at a lonely farmstead on its periphery. A two-man German patrol, lazy and overconfident, has stopped to loot chickens. Collard urges letting them pass. An incident will trigger a search. But Dmitri, seeing a chance to gather fresh intelligence from uniforms and documents, gives a silent, cutting gesture. Alexei moves like a liquid shadow. 2 minutes later, it is over. The efficiency is clinical, horrifying. As Mikhail searches the still warm bodies, his hands trembling as he pulls out pay books and orders, he finds a photograph in one man's tunic, a smiling woman and a child. He looks up, his face pale, and meets the hardened, indifferent gaze of Dmitri. The lesson is brutal and clear. Sentiment is a luxury that will get them all killed. The gap between the hunters and their partisan allies widens further. Guided now by a sullen, resentful Collard, they finally reach the edge of the universe. From a concealed position in a filthy, ice-cold drainage pipe overlooking a cleared zone, they see it for the first time with their own eyes. The Werwolf is not a collection of buildings. It is an organism, a silent, humming, malevolent presence in the clearing. The scale of the clearing is staggering, a man-made desert of mud and felled tree stumps under the harsh glare of arc lamps. Beyond the first line of barbed wire, a tangled 8-meter-thick beast, they see the geometric perfection of the barracks, the communication bunkers with their spider web antennae. And in the distance, surrounded by its own separate inner web of fencing and what look like concrete dragon's teeth, the low, ominous silhouette of the hrer bunker. They watch the clockwork ritual of the guards, the synchronized changing of shifts, the patrols with dogs that move not at random, but on strict, interlocking grids, the occasional gleam of binoculars from a watchtower. The air here feels dead, electrically charged with paranoia. The sterile lines on their Moscow maps disintegrate. This is not a model. This is a living, breathing fortress. Ivan the engineer lets out a soft, involuntary exhale as he estimates the thickness of the bunker roofs. Victor counts the communication lines with a sinking heart. Alexei's eyes track the dogs, calculating their range and behavior. Mikhail simply stares, the sheer physical impossibility of their task finally crushing down on him. Dmitri watches them all, then looks back at the lair. His stone face reveals nothing, but in his eyes a cold fire ignites. This is the reality. The theory is over. They have reached the shadow of the wolf. Now they must find a way to become a shadow within it, or be annihilated by the light. The drainage pipe becomes their world, a cold, damp, claustrophobic womb of stone and stagnant water. For 72 hours they do not move from their observation post. Time loses meaning, measured only in the relentless cycles of the German security machine. Their bodies cramp and shiver, their breath forming faint plumes in the frigid air. They urinate into bottles, eat cold paste from tubes, their senses strained to a razor's edge. They are no longer men. They are extensions of their optical devices, their ears, their notebooks. Ivan the Rock lies motionless for hours, his eye pressed to a narrow crack in the concrete, a human tripod. He is not watching people. He is studying architecture and rhythm. With the mind of an engineer, he logs the patterns. Every 20 minutes, the sentry on the nearest watchtower performs a precise 360-degree scan. At 04:17 each morning, a generator on the southern edge coughs to life, its hum masking all other sounds for exactly 90 seconds. He maps the drainage system, where the rainwater runoff flows, where the pipes are large enough to admit a desperate man. He identifies a blind spot, a wedge of shadow between the sweep of two searchlights, lasting no more than 45 seconds. It is a mathematical puzzle, and he begins to assemble its brutal solution in his mind. Alexei the ghost operates on a different plane. His eyes are closed for long periods. He is listening, smelling, feeling. He tracks the patrols not by sight but by sound. The crunch of gravel under boot, the subtle jingle of equipment, the low murmur of conversation carried on the wind. He learns the dogs. There are two types: the anxious, pacing shepherds on the inner perimeter, and the larger, more silent Rottweilers used by the mobile SS patrols. He can distinguish their barks. He notes the moment, just before dawn, when the handlers change and the animals become momentarily distracted, eager for food. He absorbs the forest's own complaints, the scolding of a jay at a specific post, the way the wind sighs through a break in the wire. The environment itself becomes his intelligence asset. Victor the Wire focuses on the technological heartbeat of the lair. Through powerful listening equipment, he monitors radio traffic, mostly mundane logistical chatter, but layered with a deeper, encrypted stream. He maps the power lines snaking from the generators, tracing their paths toward the central bunker. He identifies a vulnerability, a secondary communication trench, seemingly for telephone lines, that is less frequently patrolled. His fingers itch for his tools. He dreams of plunging the complex into darkness and silence, of severing its nervous system. Mikhail the scholar faces the most profound test. Using a high-power scope, he observes the human traffic. He watches German officers, engineers, kitchen staff, secretaries. He studies their gaits, their mannerisms, how they smoke a cigarette, how they salute. He commits the uniforms to memory, not just the branches of service, but the insignia of specific units, the wear and tear on individual outfits. He hears snippets of conversation, laughter, a shouted order. His theoretical enemy dissolves, replaced by a chilling, mundane reality. These are men and women going about their daily lives, making coffee, complaining about the cold, writing letters home. The monstrous abstraction of the principal threat now has a face that yawns, that scratches its nose, that looks bored on guard duty. This normalization of evil is more paralyzing than any caricature of a monster. Dmitri the Wolf synthesizes it all. He cross-references their notes, building a four-dimensional map in his mind. Space, time, sound, and habit. The plan that formed in Moscow is now being torn apart and rebuilt by the hard, unforgiving facts on the ground. The proposed point of entry is impossible. A new one, suggested by Ivan's drainage map, is considered and refined. The timetable is compressed, expanded, then compressed again. Every variable is weighed, every contingency imagined. He sees the stress fractures in his own team, Viktor's growing technical obsession, Mikhail's dangerous empathy, the simmering tension between Alexei's instinctual patience and his own driving imperative for action. The breakthrough comes from the most fragile and dangerous of sources: contact with the inside. Through Kolod's ragged network of whispers, a thread is pulled. A Ukrainian electrician named Yaroslav, forced to work on the interior wiring of the barracks, is being smuggled out for a night to see his dying mother. He is a man hollowed out by terror, his hands shaking not from cold, but from a perpetual low-grade panic. Confronted in a root cellar miles from the complex, he is at first mute with fear, convinced it is a Gestapo trap. It is Mikhail who reaches him, not with threats, but with a quiet shared humanity. He speaks in a gentle Ukrainian, not the Russian of the occupier. He offers no false promises, only acknowledges the man's fear and the unbearable weight of his position. Slowly, like a leaking faucet, information drips out. Yaroslav provides not grand strategic details, but the invaluable minutiae of the beast's intestines. The locations of electrical junction boxes that control the perimeter lights. The fact that the sewage tank for the officers' mess is pumped every Thursday at dawn, requiring a gate to be opened. The unguarded rear entrance to a vegetable storage cellar that lies tantalizingly close to the inner security zone. He describes with tears of shame in his eyes having seen him. A small man in a gray coat, pacing near his personal bunker, surrounded by a silent, watchful cordon of men who looked like statues that could kill. This last whispered testimony changes everything. The target is confirmed, present. The abstract becomes terrifyingly concrete. But Yaroslav also brings a silent, psychological poison. He speaks of the atmosphere inside, a suffocating blanket of suspicion, of the sudden, unexplained disappearances of workers, of the casual, reflexive cruelty. He describes the Werwolf not as a fortress, but as a panopticon, where every eye is potentially an enemy's eye, where trust is the quickest path to a bullet in the forest. The paranoia of the place seeps through his words and into the cellar, infecting the hunters. Returning to their drainage pipe observatory, the atmosphere has shifted. They have a path now, a bloody, fragile blueprint built on a trembling man's fear. But they have also absorbed the essence of the lair's true defense, not just its wire and concrete, but the psychological corrosion it breeds. The certainty they brought from Moscow is gone, replaced by a grim, specific knowledge and a deep, chilling foreboding. Dmitri gathers them in the near-total darkness. He does not give a speech. He lays out the final plan in terse, stark segments. The entry point, the sewage gate, the window, Thursday at 05:20, during the pump truck's noise, and the dog handler's changeover, the primary and secondary targets, the rally point in the forest after, the signals for abort. Each man's role is spelled out with the finality of a sentence. He looks at each of them in turn, at Ivan's stoic nod, at Alexei's predatory stillness, at Viktor's nervous swallow, at Mikhail's pale, determined face. They are not a team. They are a mechanism, its components forged in different furnaces, now assembled for a single, Catastrophic function. The time for observation is over. The shadow must now move. They have memorized the wolf's habits. Now they must slip into its den and cut its throat, before the paralyzing fear they have witnessed from the outside consumes them from within. Thursday dawned, not with light, but with a creeping pre-dawn gray that seemed to bleed from the frozen earth itself. The cold was a living thing, sinking teeth into bone. The 5 figures, now coated in a paste of mud and charcoal, were no longer men, but primal smudges against the dark forest. They had shed anything that could shine, clink, or smell of humanity. They carried only the tools of murder and silence. Their approach was a slow, torturous peristalsis through the final 100 meters of no man's land. Every inch was an eternity of controlled agony. Alexei the ghost led, his body flowing over the ground like black oil, his senses parsing a universe of threat in every snapped twig, every shift of the wind. The rest followed in his literal footsteps, a grotesque slow-motion conga line of death. The stench from the sewage pond ahead grew overwhelming, a thick, gagging sweetness of decay that was their olfactory camouflage and their beacon. The gate was there, just as the electrician Yaroslav had said. A heavy, reinforced steel door set into the outer perimeter fence, left ajar for the pumping truck due at 05:30. 2 guards flanked it, stamping their feet against the cold, their breath pluming in the gloom. Their attention was divided. One watched the interior road, the other peered out into the threatening forest. They were bored, cold, and utterly unprepared for what came from the ground at their feet. From a drainage ditch, slick with foul ice, Alexei and Dmitri emerged not as men, but as eruptions of silent violence. There was no struggle, no cry. A blur of motion, the sickening, wet crunch of cartilage, and the 2 sentries were melting into the shadows, their bodies dragged into the stinking ditch. The efficiency was so total, so quiet. It was more horrifying than any battle. They were in. The interior of the Werwolf was a different planet. The scale was both smaller and more intense. The neat gravel paths, the harsh, angular buildings, the web of cables overhead. It felt like a stage set for a play about order. But the air vibrated with a feverish, paranoid energy. They moved not as a group, but as a single distributed organism, flowing from shadow to shadow, from the cover of a generator shed to the blind spot of a barracks wall. Ivan's 45-second window between searchlights became their sacred liturgy. Their target was the communications bunker, a low concrete wedge 50 meters from the main hrer bunker. Victor the Wire's role was absolute here. While Dmitri and Alexei covered the approaches, Victor slithered into a shallow service trench, his fingers becoming extensions of his will. He located the main conduit, a thick, armored cable bundle. With delicate, terrifying speed, he unpacked his shaped charges, not to destroy, but to tap. His device was a masterpiece of malice, a parasite clamp that would feed a surge of destructive current directly into the bunker's nervous system at a precise moment, blinding and deafening the beast right before the main assault. It was here that the plan began to fray. A door to a nearby barracks opened, spilling yellow light and raucous laughter. A trio of off-duty signals officers, returning from a late card game, stumbled out into the cold. They were heading directly toward Victor's position. Mikhail the scholar, stationed as a lookout, froze. His mind, trained in language and behavior, short-circuited. The moment for a perfect, silent takedown evaporated. One of the Germans, squinting, called out a half-drunken query into the darkness where Mikhail stood. Dmitri's reaction was instantaneous and cataclysmic. He abandoned cover. He stepped into the path of the three men, not as a commando, but as an angry, misplaced German NCO, barking a reprimand about noise discipline. His performance was flawless, his accent perfect. The soldiers snapped to a confused, tipsy attention. For 3 heartbeats, it worked. Then the youngest of them, his eyes adjusting, saw the strange, non-regulation cut of Dmitri's mud-caked jacket, the absence of any unit insignia. The young soldier's hand twitched toward his holstered pistol. The silence of the night was torn apart by the flat, brutal crack of Alexei's suppressed pistol. The young soldier dropped. The other 2 stood frozen in shock, their brains lagging behind reality. It was a fatal delay. Dmitri and Alexei closed the distance in a storm of silenced gunfire and flashing knives. It was over in seconds. But the damage was done. A light flicked on in a nearby window. A dog began barking furiously from a kennel. The werewolf was stirring. Panic was a luxury they could not afford. Discipline reasserted itself with iron teeth. They dragged the bodies into shadows. Victor, sweat freezing on his brow, finished clamping his device. The rally signal was given. They had to move now, toward the inner perimeter, the sanctum. But the complex was now a disturbed anthill. A shouted order echoed. Boots pounded on gravel somewhere to their left. They reached the final barrier, the inner fence, a gleaming, lethal web of razor wire under the direct glare of a watchtower. This was Ivan the Rock's moment. While the others lay prone, hearts hammering against the frozen earth, Ivan worked with the calm of a man defusing a bomb. He unspooled a specially treated non-reflective blanket over a section of wire. He applied a viscous paste from a tube, a chemical compound that ate through metal with a faint, sickly hiss and the smell of burnt almonds. He was creating a temporary, melting gap. It was a work of dark art, horrifyingly slow. From the tower above, a sentry paused his rhythmic scan. He leaned forward, peering into the gloom below. He saw a shape, a deeper patch of darkness that shouldn't be there. He raised his rifle. A single shot rang out, loud and unconcealed. But it was not the sentry's. It was Mikhail's. From his position, watching the man take aim at Ivan's exposed back, Mikhail had acted on pure, desperate instinct. The sentry cried out, stumbling back. The shot was a klaxon horn, blaring across the entire complex. Chaos erupted. Sirens wailed to life, their undulating shriek shredding the night. Blinding white floodlights snapped on, swinging wildly, turning night into a stark, jagged tableau of black and white. From every direction, the pounding of boots, the guttural shouts of German, the frenzied barking of dogs unleashed. The hunters were caught in a converging hell. They were shadows, no more. They were prey. Dmitri made the only decision left. With a sharp hand signal, he pointed to Victor, and then toward the inner compound. The mission continues. Then he pointed to himself, Alexei, and Ivan, and then outward toward the oncoming storm. The diversion. What followed was not a battle, but a savage, close-quarters detonation of violence in a labyrinth of light and noise. Dmitri, Alexei, and Ivan turned toward the approaching SS reaction squad. They fought with the cold fury of cornered wolves. Silenced weapons were discarded for captured MP-40s. Ivan used his remaining explosives not with precision, but for carnage, blowing a crater in a path to funnel the enemy. Alexei seemed to dance between the searching light beams, a phantom delivering death at point-blank range. Dmitri was a pillar of terrifying, methodical fire, drawing the hunt onto himself. It was a sacrifice play, clear and brutal. They were not trying to win. They were trying to buy seconds. Through the melting gap in the wire, Victor and Mikhail slithered into the very heart of the wolf's den. They could see the concrete mass of the hrer bunker ahead, its entrance a dark maw. But between them, and it was a swarm of personal bodyguards, the hrer Beglit battalion, spilling from their posts, forming a living armed wall. Victor, his face a mask of tears from the chemical smoke and terror, found the secondary junction box he needed. He slammed the plunger on his handheld generator, sending Victor's parasitic surge screaming into the main bunker's systems. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The lights on the inner compound flickered, died, then came back on in a frantic, stuttering pulse. From the communications bunker, a plume of acrid smoke erupted as electronics fried. For a few precious seconds, the organized defense turned into a shouting, disoriented chaos. It was their only window. The objective was there, 30 meters away, shrouded in confusion. But the living wall of bodyguards was solidifying, their weapons coming up, their training overcoming the shock. Mikhail looked at Victor, seeing the same terrible understanding in his eyes. They had reached the absolute limit of the possible. They had touched the beast. They had drawn blood, caused chaos, proven the lair was penetrable. But the final killing stroke was now a geometric impossibility. A long, withering burst of machine gun fire from a newly emplaced position tore into the ground at their feet, kicking up fountains of gravel. The window had slammed shut. From the raging firefight at the outer perimeter, a series of detonations shook the ground, Ivan using the last of his charges, a final defiant act to cover their retreat. The order was not given. It was understood. The mission had failed in its ultimate goal, but it could not fail entirely. They could not be captured. The secrets in their heads were as destructive as any bomb. Victor grabbed Mikhail's arm, pulling him back with shocking force. They turned from the bunker, from the impossible dream, and fled back into the maelstrom of light, noise, and blood, vanishing into the frantic, angry shadows of the wounded wolf's lair. Retreat was not a maneuver. It was a descent into a primal, sensory nightmare. The neat tactical lines of the plan disintegrated into a frantic scramble for survival through a landscape that had become electrically hostile. The roar of the sirens was a physical pressure against their eardrums, a pulsing mechanical scream that swallowed all other sound. The sweeping floodlights transformed the forest's edge into a stroboscopic hellscape of elongated, leaping shadows and blinding, frozen tableau of chaos. For Victor and Mikhail, clawing their way back through the melting, chemically stinking gap in the inner wire, the world narrowed to a tunnel of panic. The image of the hrer bunker, so close yet shielded by an impassable wall of disciplined flesh and steel, was burned into their vision, a monument to their catastrophic near-success. Their bodies moved on an adrenal autopilot, driven by Dmitri's last unspoken command: survive. Report. Behind them, the diversion became a vortex of annihilation. Dmitri, Alexei, and Ivan were no longer hunters. They were a rearguard demon, conjured to buy time with their own lives. They fought with the terrifying economy of men who have severed their tether to hope. Ivan, the engineer of structures, became an engineer of chaos. He used his last blocks of plastic explosive not on bunkers, but on the geography itself, collapsing a section of a storage shed onto a pursuing squad, turning a gravel path into a pit of shrapnel and flame. He died as he calculated, caught in the intersecting fields of fire from 2 MG-34 machine guns, his body shattered mid-throw of a final grenade. Alexei, the creature of the forest, was finally cornered in a place with no shadows. He fought in a silent, vicious frenzy, his knife claiming 2 more SS troopers in the choking smoke, before a burst of automatic fire at close range tore through his leg, dropping him to the mud. He did not cry out. As a furious corporal closed in for the kill, Alexei's hand flashed one last time. A thrown combat knife found the man's throat. A second later, a pistol shot from an officer ended Alexei's struggle. The ghost was finally, irrevocably, made material. Dmitri, the wolf, saw his men fall. His own ammunition was spent. Wounded in the side, his gray jacket dark with blood, he staged a last, deliberate stand in the open, firing a captured pistol until it clicked empty. He drew his knife. He did not charge. He stood, a dark, defiant silhouette against the flickering fires, drawing every eye, every weapon towards himself, away from the fleeing shadows of Victor and Mikhail. A storm of gunfire cut him down. His body jerked and fell into the churned, freezing mud. The instrument was broken. Victor and Mikhail, hearts slamming against their ribs, their lungs burning with each sucked-in gasp of frozen air, breached the outer perimeter through a storm drain, emerging into the relative darkness of the surrounding forest. But the forest was no longer a sanctuary. The werewolf's wrath extended its claws. Alarm horns echoed from distant villages. Headlights of vehicles slithered down country roads. The systematic, methodical hunt had begun. They were now hares in a tightening snare. They ran, stumbled, and crawled, guided only by a desperate memory of their approach maps. The partisan rally point was compromised. They found it deserted. The signs of a hasty, frightened evacuation clear. Collard and his people, knowing the full fury about to descend, had vanished into the deeper woods. They were utterly alone. The German response was swift and brutal. SS security battalions, reinforced by eager Hilfspolizei, who knew every thicket, began combing operations. Trackers with dogs picked up their scent. The first contact was a brief, terrifying exchange of fire at a creek crossing. Mikhail took a grazing bullet to the shoulder, the impact spinning him around like a broken doll. Victor dragged him into the icy water, using the current to break their trail. The cold, a shock so profound, it bordered on anesthesia. For days, they moved only at night, through a world turned enemy. Hunger became a sharp, hollow pain. Thirst was assuaged by sucking on filthy, moss-covered bark. Mikhail's wound, poorly bandaged, festered, and he drifted in and out of feverish delirium, muttering in German and Ukrainian, a burden Victor refused to abandon. Their silence was total, communicative only through touches and gestures, their world reduced to the next patch of cover, the next frozen ditch. They witnessed, from hiding places in barn lofts and peat bogs, the price of their raid. Columns of smoke rose from villages suspected of aiding partisans. They heard, carried on the wind, the distant ragged volleys of execution squads. The werewolf was expunging its shame with a wildfire of collective punishment. The weight of those unseen deaths settled on them, a moral gravity as crushing as their physical exhaustion. Victor's technical genius now served only survival. He rigged simple but vicious traps, tripwires with stolen German grenades, Along their back trail, small, cruel delays that cost their pursuers blood and time. He found a way to jury-rig a charge to bring down a small bridge behind them. Each act was a whisper of defiance in a roaring gale of pursuit. Their final escape was less a triumph than a pathetic, stumbling accident of geography. Half dead, frostbitten, with Mikhail now more carried than led, Victor chanced upon a hidden, half-frozen stream that led to the banks of the Southern Bug River. Using debris lashed together with their last shreds of rope and willpower, they floated, insensate, through a gap in the German cordon, into the no-man's land between fronts. They were found, more corpse than man, by a Red Army forward reconnaissance patrol. Their story, stammered through cracked lips in a field hospital tent, was met not with awe, but with cold, immediate sequestration. Men from SMERSH, the military counterintelligence service, arrived within hours. Their debriefing was not a celebration, but an interrogation. In Moscow, the reaction was absolute, final, and clinical. The operation had failed in its primary objective. It had, however, provoked a massive, embarrassing security crisis for the Germans, proving the vulnerability of Hitler's most secure place. This intelligence was priceless, but the men who carried it were now the greatest liability. They were a loose end, a secret that could not be allowed to breathe. Mikhail, weakened by his wound and the psychological trauma of his empathetic plunge into the heart of the enemy, was sent to a remote sanatorium. He would die 2 years later of pneumonia, his files permanently sealed. Victor, the technician, was deemed too valuable to discard, but too dangerous to leave loose. He was transferred to a closed scientific institute in the Urals, where his genius for circuits and explosives was applied in total isolation for the rest of his long-watched life, his name erased from all military rolls. As for the Werwolf itself, the official history was scrubbed clean. No Soviet communique ever mentioned a raid. No partisan report was allowed to speak of it. The chaos, the explosions, the German reprisals, all were attributed to generic partisan activity, a useful, foggy myth. The order from the very top was succinct and terminal. The hunters never existed. The werewolf was never targeted. Let the fascists bury their own panic. We will bury the truth. In the forests of Vinnytsia, the silence returned, deeper and more profound. The blood seeped into the soil. The broken bodies of Ivan, Alexei, and Dmitri were disposed of by the SS in an unmarked pit, their identities obliterated. The legend of the mysterious attack flickered briefly among the partisans and the terrified locals. A story of shadows that had dared to strike the wolf, before being subsumed by the larger, louder narrative of the war. The truth was buried under layers of official denial, scorched earth reprisals, and the simple, overwhelming desire of those who survived to forget the terrifying night. The devil's own lair had been breached, and the even more terrifying silence that followed. The modern forest is never truly silent. It holds the vibration of the past in its roots. In the quiet archival room, Volodymyr stares at the scanned roster with the 5 aliases and the final brutal red stamp. Terminated on sight, liquidate all traces. The words are not just an order. They are a key turning in a lock, buried for 80 years. The ghost in the ground now has a call sign. The phantom operation has a name: Hunters. He does not go home that night. The digital glow of his monitor is the only light as he cross-references the past with a forensic, obsessive hunger. He finds the sanitized post-war Soviet reports on partisan disruptions near Vinnytsia in the summer of 1943. vague, boastful, devoid of specifics. He finds the declassified German security bulletins from the same period, detailing a significant and sophisticated infiltration attempt at the hrer Hauptquartier Werwolf, resulting in multiple enemy casualties and heightened security protocols indefinitely. The dry Nazi bureaucracy of the report cannot mask the underlying tone of shaken, profound alarm. Volodymyr then finds the medical records of a certain Mikhail R., admitted to a remote psychiatric sanatorium in 1944 with a diagnosis of severe frontline neurosis with dissociative features. The file notes his recurring, feverish mutterings about wire, lights, and a face in the window. The attending physician's final note is chillingly succinct. Patient exhibits signs of extreme specific trauma inconsistent with generalized frontline service. Source of trauma deemed unexplainable and not for further inquiry. He pulls the personnel file of Victor S., a decorated communications engineer who worked for decades at a closed P.O. Box institute. His service record before 1943 is a perplexing blank, followed by a sudden, glittering career in military radio silence technology. A single faded photograph from a 1970s internal newsletter shows an old man with haunted, watchful eyes at a laboratory bench. The caption calls him a valuous, long-serving specialist. Volodymyr knows the code. This was a gilded cage. The final piece is not a document, but a journey. Volodymyr and Anna drive back to the forest near Vinnytsia. They do not return to the main excavation site. Instead, using Ivan's deduced map of drainage patterns and the last known location of Dmitri's final stand from the German report, they navigate to a nondescript, low-lying area near the old perimeter, now overgrown with sickly-looking alder and thick brambles. The ground is soft, perpetually damp. Anna's ground-penetrating radar, a humming technological prod against the ancient silence, reveals not one, but several anomalies. Irregular shapes, too dense for tree roots, clustered together at a depth consistent with a hurried wartime burial. They are not in coffins. They begin to dig, not with the broad strokes of archaeology, but with the delicate, solemn care of a forensic exhumation. The first thing they find is not bone, but a relic. A heavily corroded but unmistakable Soviet F-1 grenade, its distinctive pineapple texture still visible under the rust. It is of early war manufacture. Next to it, a small, twisted piece of metal, the remains of a non-standard, custom-made breech tool. Then the bones. They unearth 3 sets of remains. The first is of a large, powerful frame. The ribs on one side are utterly pulverized, consistent with the impact of multiple high-velocity rounds from a machine gun. Ivan the Rock. The second skeleton is smaller, wiry. A leg bone shows a catastrophic, shattering break, and near the spine lies a single, deformed 9mm pistol bullet. Alexei the Ghost felled from behind after his leg was shot out. The third skeleton tells the most eloquent story. It is lying face down, arms slightly outstretched. The skull is intact, but the vertebrae of the neck and upper back are a chaotic jigsaw puzzle of fractures from bullets that entered from the front and passed through. Dmitri the Wolf, standing his ground, taking the full fury of the volley into his chest. Amongst these bones, they find the personal artifacts the SS burial detail missed or ignored. A tiny hand-carved wooden bear, polished smooth by years of touch. A totem from Ivan's Urals. A set of delicate handmade fishhooks fashioned from hardened wire. Alexei's insurance against starvation. And with Dmitri, nestled under the sternum where a pocket would have been, a small sealed metal locket, miraculously preserved. Anna gently pries it open. Inside is not the picture of a lover or a child, but a carefully folded tiny square of paper. Unfolding it with infinite care, they reveal a hand-drawn, meticulous diagram. It is a schematic of the hrer bunker's ventilation system, with a single red pencil arrow pointing to a specific intake shaft. A path, not taken. A final, unreleased piece of the plan. Volodymyr looks from the bones to the locket, to the scan of the roster on his tablet. The circuit is closed. The evidence is now a seamless, unbreakable chain. The order from Moscow, the physical penetration of the lair, the violent termination, the state-sanctioned oblivion for the survivors, and the hidden grave of the fallen. He understands the full, terrible truth. The mission was not a failure. It was a tectonic event that was immediately covered by an avalanche of lies. It achieved the militarily impossible, penetrating the heart of Hitler's security, but failed in the single, spectacular objective. For that, it was erased. The men were not heroes. They were an embarrassment, a dangerous secret. They were sacrificed twice. First to the German guns, then to the Soviet memory hole. Anna stands over the open grave, the Ukrainian soil staining her hands. She looks at the skeletons, these men who were tools, phantoms, and now, finally, evidence. She thinks of her own grandfather who fought in these woods, of the stories that were told, and the ones that were swallowed by silence. This is the real legacy of the raid. Not a changed war, but a testament to the audacity that was possible and the crushing machinery that exists to bury such audacity when it falls short of the miraculous. Volodymyr packs the evidence. The report he will write will not be for a public museum. It will be a sealed, definitive monograph for the archives, a private monument to truth in a world that prefers myth. He knows it will not rewrite the history books. The official story is too entrenched, too convenient. But as they leave the forest, the late afternoon sun casts long, skeletal shadows of the pines across the ground. In that dancing, fragmented light, the past feels palpably close. The hunters have been found. Their story, in all its gritty, tragic, and violently ambitious detail, has been reassembled from the earth and from the ink. They are no longer a myth. They are a fact. The forest will keep its other secrets, the exact moment of the breach, the look in Hitler's eyes, if he ever knew how close the shadow came, the final private thoughts of Dmitri, Ivan, and Alexei as the lights found them. But the central, terrifying question has been answered. Yes, Soviet commandos did try to assassinate Hitler at his Ukrainian headquarters. They touched the walls of his bunker. They shook his empire to its paranoid core, and for their near success, they were condemned to vanish from history. The unquiet earth, at last, has given up its testimony. The ghosts are accounted for. Their silence is over.